This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 97.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the New Look Rogers. Matt, look a little bit different. You look nice. How's everything going?
You know, since we last talked, the Phillies and the Union lost their championships.
Yeah, same day.
You know, the Birds are at least 8-0 at this point as we're recording it. So hopefully we don't send that to a demise. But I thought it was a time to, take off some of the facial hair. And I've got to tell you, bud, I do this every year right around this time where I just shave. I've gone from August until this point with some version of facial hair at different lengths. And it doesn't grow in crazy, but the kids it's not that much different, but it's just different enough that they're confused. So keeping them on their toes.
Yeah, it's funny what they pick up on and what they get excited about. My classes were always obsessed with snacks that I would eat during the day, like to the point of like constantly asking me about it, and then like sometimes I would walk around with like half of an avocado and just like scoop out of the peel and eat it. So they always found that to be entertaining. And so I actually have a pretty cool story. I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. I was working in a class and one of my former students who is now a senior was there, and we were talking, and I was asking him about like his plans for next year and how high school's been going for him. And then literally 5 minutes later, I passed him in the hallway again. And, we kind of joked about it and laughed about it. And he goes, "Mr. Herman, what do you do now?" And I told him my position. He said, "Oh, that makes sense." He's like, "Cause I've seen you the last couple of years." He's like, "I was really wondering what you were doing in high school. I'm really proud of you, Mr. Herman." And he walks away. It was just a very cool moment to have a student say to me, not that I'm just, I'm still a teacher, I'm just in a coaching position, but just to hear a former student of yours who I taught when he was 10 and 11, and he's now 17 or 18, to say, "I'm proud of you, Mr. Ehrman," was a pretty cool feeling, something that I haven't experienced before. And it really stuck with me.
I feel like we're getting to that point in our careers because, my kids are going to my first regular ed class. My special ed classes that I had for 5 years have graduated. 3 years ago was the first group that went through. But I'm finally getting to the point that my regular ed classes are going to graduate. And I remember last year I went through the middle school and the high school, and just seeing these kids who, at least when they were in my building, but upper class, 5th and 6th grade, they would avoid their eyes. They would act like I wasn't a real human being, embarrassed to see me. Now, mind you, I kind of am the goofball, or what I've recently termed the heel of the building, to use a wrestling term. But in this middle school, high school, my conversations with my former students, or even students that I didn't have, but they knew about me, is just, it has been so validating. And like that, it is the motivation as we move into the season of seasonal depression. These are the type things that we need to remember that we're doing the right thing. So if it's not coming to you yet, it will come eventually.
Absolutely. And on that note, our guest tonight, Greg Bagby, very diverse experience, teacher, band director, building leader, now district leader. Very, very refreshing to hear how he interacted with his staff, treated his staff, shielded his staff, which he will describe. Just the way that he took into account the whole person, whether it was the students, the parents, or more specifically his teachers. And I think based on what we hear and based on the way that he worked with his staff and treated his staff and supported his staff, that 10 years down the line, if he's in a different district or he's running into the teachers he had, I feel like there would be very similar feelings like we're describing right now, because it was his main goal to make them feel as best supported and just to give them the space to do what they thought was best for their kids. What was your biggest takeaway? And then we'll jump right in.
I felt like he led with what I know I've concluded this before, the leader that you wish that you worked for type scenario over and over again. The approval to do what you feel like is best for kids. And if that was the silver lining, if that was the theme, it was pretty much, not only would he support it, but he would also take the battles for you and support you with anyone that would challenge, which is just everything as an educator that we hope for. And I think both of us are really fortunate with our instructional teams and our admin team that we feel very similar. And that is what allows us to take these challenges. I know that's not necessarily a universal feeling. So, but there's a way that you can build trust, and there's a way that you can build the opportunity, because, I think after recording almost 100 episodes, we haven't heard a situation where trying things and taking risks has been discouraged. It's figuring out how you can do that most responsibly.
Absolutely. So without any further delay, let's jump right into our conversation with Greg Bagby.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Greg. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
I am fantastic. And yourself?
We are doing great. I'm really excited to be with you tonight. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So kick things off for us. Just officially introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know where you're maybe usually coming from and what your role and connection.
Okay, so Greg Bagby. I'm out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm the coordinator of instructional technology for the Hamilton County School System, which is in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I've had extensive educational career. Okay, yeah, that sounds cheesy. No, started off as a teacher, band director, reading teacher, became a computer teacher, as well as band director, and then I moved into administration. I was an assistant principal and then principal at a school for 10 years, and took over to the real dark side of central office about 4 years ago, pre-pandemic, and now I help teachers integrate technology into their classrooms.
Awesome. So we've actually had a couple of music teachers on our show, and every time we have, I've found the conversations to be pretty fascinating. One, because I don't have any musical talent whatsoever, so I find anyone that can play one instrument impressive, as well as someone who's teaching every instrument even more impressive. But as your time, so you said band director, reading teacher, technology teacher, and then you said music teacher, and then you circle back to band. So in your experience teaching music, being a band director, working in that leadership role related to music, what do you think you gained from that instructionally that benefited you when you transitioned into being a reading teacher, into being a technology teacher? What were those instructional pieces that you felt you learned specifically in the music role that you wouldn't have gained if you didn't have that position?
The idea of performance-based assessments. As a music teacher, the students are performing right then and right there all the time. And you can give them immediate feedback because they hear it's wrong and you hear it's wrong. So you can give them that immediate feedback. And the whole idea of the student performing and knowing that, yes, it is a process, because your beginning trumpet, sax, whatever player, they're not going to be perfect at the beginning. but there's a process. If they're practicing, you can tell if their tone gets better and things change. Same thing with teaching web design. It's a process. It's not okay, so at the end of this time, you need to have this, this, and this done. No, you got to watch the process. You got to watch the learning process. See how the kids grow. Same thing when kids are reading and understanding. It was sixth graders, and they started off, I guess, on a below fifth grade level or something like that. And as they progress throughout the school year, you can tell the change and you see the difference. And it's not the end product. It was never about the end product, even though, yes, as band director or whatever, we had concerts and performances and all that. But it was about the process, getting there, getting students to get to that point. Same thing as in doing computer, teaching apps and teaching coding. It's the process of the kids learning and thinking and doing. I think that's what music helped me understand, that there's a process, even as a teacher and a trainer now, understanding the process that the teachers are going through and not saying, oh, you don't know how to do this, you don't know how to do that. But it's a learning process. Yes, these tools, and eventually you'll put them together and we'll grow. So there you go.
It's a pretty nice, way to put it. I love that performance based, because we think about that usually as what are the results of the score at the end. And I guess a lot of my initial thought when you talk about having just a wild background of education, really all over the place, is how do you feel like, kind of piggybacking off Ken's perspective, how do you feel like your staff received you as you moved into administrative roles? Because you were, I assume when you did reading, it was more of a, was it a core reading or was it a supplemental reading situation? Like coming from the background of, oh, can he speak my language because he hasn't had a homeroom type scenario? Are there experiences like that or trials and tribulations you had that you had to kind of adjust to connect to your staff and speak their language?
Well, crazy enough, it was core reading and it was supplemental.
Wow. Okay.
It was a little bit of both. And actually, my reading group became my homeroom. So I did have that access as well. But working with the staff, it was as an AP, you just get in where you fit in and try to do the best you can to stay alive. It was at a inner city high school, and I dealt with sex, drugs, and violence on a daily basis. So the teachers didn't really care how much I knew about their curriculum or the things that were going on. They just wanted me to make sure their classrooms were safe for kids to come in and learn. But as I moved into my own principalship, school where I worked was actually a elementary fine arts academy. So I had the background in fine arts, and the teachers knew that. And because of that background, and I got to be the assistant principal there the year before I became principal, they saw the way that I worked. They saw the relationships that I built, not only with the students, but with the families and other teachers. And I think that made a difference. And the teachers, when they announced that I was going to be the principal that next year, seemed like they were happy about it. One of the things that I always like to brag about, just because I did it, so I will. As I was at this inner city elementary school, we would have meetings at the beginning of each school year, and they would talk about, okay, how many teachers did you have to hire for this year? How many teachers? Because there's a lot of turnover in urban elementary schools and in urban areas, but I had very little turnover. I remember one year saying, I had to hire 2 teachers, and I had to hire 1, and they're going down the list asking how many, and it's, I had to hire 14 teachers. I had to hire 12 teachers. It's like, 2 or 1. And then one year I didn't have any teachers leave me, and they're like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that I still have the teachers that I had. And it's just one of those things that, when I got into that role, not only did the teachers trust that I knew what I was doing, not sure why, but I would build authentic relationships with those folks, the teachers, the students, and the parents. so that they would be willing to work hard and work with me. I told the teachers, none of them work for me. They may be teachers and I may be the principal, but no one works for me. We all work together and to get things done. And I think that helped them realize that I'm in it to win with them. There were times where somebody do a spill in the cafeteria. I get the mop and mop bucket and go clean it up. I don't care. There was some kid threw some stuff on the roof of the school. I climbed the ladder on the inside and got to the roof, and I went and found the stuff and pulled it down. And it was one of those things that you do whatever you need to do to make sure that the kids are doing the right thing or being able to do what they need to do. And same thing with the teachers. And one of the other things that I did with those teachers to help them see that I was okay, this day and age, teachers get lots and lots of stuff pushed down on them from central office and other places. I would be the shield that would block central office mandates, so to speak, from my teachers. So I got in trouble a lot with my supervisor, and she would say, "Hey, Greg, I know you know this, but you didn't do this, or you didn't do that, you didn't do this." And it was one of those things where, yeah, I felt that it wasn't right for the teachers, and the teachers would revolt. So I just didn't do it on my own. So I would get in trouble. I'd take the hit so the teachers wouldn't get in trouble. I know that's a lot, but
how did you? Because I find that interesting because the principal that I worked for a long time had a similar mentality. And I had a similar mentality in my own classroom, whether it was from district office or even from him. So how did you make your staff aware of that, or how did they become aware of that without one, like kind of trying to brag about it to say like, look at all this stuff that I'm doing for you, because that would not be perceived in the authentic way that you're doing it. But also, did that spark conversation or create situations where teachers were kind of going rogue on you and things you were saying? And then how did that situation, evolve from there? Did you applaud that? Were you happy about that? Just kind of how did that open up the opportunity in your building for teachers taking more risk, I guess is kind of what I'm asking.
So the teachers, they would know that I blocked some of the things because my district, even though we had 45,000, or I guess we still do, about 45,000 students, the teachers would meet monthly with teachers from other buildings and other PDs and things. So they would find out, oh, wait, we didn't have to do that. We didn't have to do this. So they found out from talking to other teachers that I blocked things from them. So I didn't need to go brag because I knew that they would find out, because there were times where their peers had to do things that they didn't. And sometimes they would ask me, why didn't we have to? And I was like, oh, well, we do, but I'm not too worried about it yet, or whatever. And the whole idea of teachers going rogue, I would try it. Okay, so we did have faculty meetings because I was told I had to. I hate faculty meetings, just so you know. I'd rather send an email. But there are times where I was told that I had to have so many faculty meetings. And in those faculty meetings, I would do things. I would say, get a product and train the teachers in front of train the teachers with a product in front of them. And sometimes I didn't know the product at all, and I would fail, and I would tell the teachers, it's okay. We'll all learn together. And I'm trying something new. So I would be more than happy if you tried something new. And if you fail, we'll just figure out what went wrong and we'll make it better and we'll move forward. So I had teachers that would try things without fear, that whole idea of psychological safety. They had that safety where they knew that if I walked in and they were doing something and the lesson didn't work out, it was okay. It's just one of those things. And that was the big thing with me. And just so you know, my school wasn't a crazy, rampant, blah, blah, blah. When I got there, I think there was 9% of the students on or above grade level out of the whole school, 9%. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. When I left, I think we were at 64. So we were actually making gains, slowly making gains. So it was one of those things where they trusted me and I allowed them to be crazy with some of the things that they did, and I trusted them. So I think that worked. So I did have some that went rogue, but they were going rogue for the kids, and I was okay with that.
Right, because they're seeing you, you're making these decisions to shield things from them, not because you feel like it. You're doing it because you felt what was best for your teachers and what was best for your students. And so, when teachers are making that same decision, I'm going to do it this way because I feel it's best for my students, then that's okay. And I've said the same thing to teachers when I'm encouraging them or supporting them and trying something new. If we're doing it from a place of we think this is going to better serve the students sitting in front of that teacher at that time, and it fails, and someone challenges you and you have reason to believe why it was going to work because it would benefit, then no one's going to have a problem with that. And if they do, then that's something much more important than a failed lesson or a failed project.
So sounds like you take risk as well, and your administrators are okay with that.
Yeah, I do. And I think, when I would do it in the classroom, I would do it for a very intentional purpose. And it was always because I felt it was going to benefit my students. And if I was questioned on it, not that I was much, but if I was ever questioned, a principal or an administrator walks into my room and things look very different. And if they were to ask me, why are you doing it this way? I would have legitimate reasons, maybe data, maybe not data, but I would have legitimate reasons always circling around. I felt it was going to be a better experience for my students.
Yes.
And so as a coach, when I'm doing that with teachers, if we're using that lens, we have the right intention. We might not get the right result. It might not work out, but when you have the right intentions in education, I think that's sound and grounded. As long as if it doesn't work, you can't keep making the same mistake. You got to adjust. But, if you're coming from that perspective, I think that you're always doing best by students.
Yes. And the whole idea of living and dying by the state test, that's how a lot of my principals felt, my colleagues felt, and some still do. But I remember one of my last years in the building as a principal, someone asking me about the state test, and they're like, well, we haven't done a pep rally, and you haven't been talking to kids and encouraging them to do all the things because the test is coming up next week. And I was like, it's just going to be another day, another week in the lives of these kids. And there's no need to put heavy burdens on these students. If they know it, they'll know it. And if they don't, it's okay. And it was just one of those things that, yes, I know state testing, and it'll be in the newspaper, it'll be on the websites, everyone will know. Okay, I'm glad they know, but I shouldn't change what I do if I'm doing right by kids for that week of testing or 2 weeks of testing now. It was just one of those, yeah, there's a test. And the day before the test, that Friday, I did get on the intercom because we got a little script saying, hey, make sure you do this and do this for your kids. Y'all get some sleep. Testing on Monday. And that was about it.
Well, I think, as a classroom teacher, that's the message we all want to hear. I don't think there's an educator that doesn't agree that it's important to a district. A lot of us wish that, the people that care most about it cared about it a little bit less. But there's a reason why your admin or your DO representation care a lot about it, because, a lot of times they are the liaison between the community, whether that's parents or, the stakeholders for that school district. I've been thinking a lot about your past and having this musical background where you saw growth very quickly. If a kid comes back and has practiced quite a bit, or the growth of not knowing how to play an instrument to, being able to, or to handle a difficult piece. And even the side of ed tech, where you can see kids' eyes light up when they get higher in that SAMR model, when they're in creativity, when they're, representing their own thoughts and interests and creativity through educational technology. I see the light bulbs going off, and those are two, what I would imagine, addictive parts of education, which I can absolutely see why you'd be drawn to. What were your draws to when you were in that intermediate range? Because, my perspective of being in an admin role is that you deal with so many of the challenging things that get away from those light bulb uh, enjoyable moments. What are those draws? Or, the reading, it's really hard to, I can measure reading fluency, and I can see from the beginning of the year to the end of the year growth, but it's difficult to see week in and week out that growth in that performance, to really, you know, latch onto as, I'm super excited about what's going on in my classroom, or because of the efforts I'm putting out there.
So in the midterm or in the medium or during the process, I guess it was it was a little difficult, of course, but ever since I started teaching, sorry, sirens going off in my ear. But ever since I started teaching, I always recorded my students, be it with my cassette deck. Uh, those were things that had little tapes that were anyway. Yeah, I recorded with my cassette deck. I had a little recorder, like the kid in Home Alone, and I would uh, my talk boy, and I'd record the students so they could hear themselves. And we recorded ourselves a lot because I found even just recording myself teaching and hearing the audio, um, and understanding what I'm saying and going back and reflecting, always trying to reflect on what I did that week and focusing on how I can make myself better. Um, it helped knowing that, okay, so I did this and this and this and this, and all these things were wrong. I need to change what I'm doing. So I found out that if I continually try to improve my teaching, I would actually improve what I'm hearing from the students, as in, oh, not only did he not play that passage correctly, but he played that passage incorrectly and he added extra beats to this passage or whatever. The more that I improved myself and my teaching and my pedagogy, the more that I could see how I could help the students. So that's what helped me in the interim between the concert, learning the first note, and the band concert, so to speak. It was constant reflection. It was this big thing when I was in school. Oh, we all got to be reflective practitioners. Reflective practitioners. I was like, yeah, right, whatever. But then when I actually did it, I was like, oh, well, maybe the professors had something. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should look back on what I've done. And even when I became an administrator, always every year at the end of the year, the teachers got worksheets to fill out on me, and it was CCS continue or CSS continue, stop, start. What things do we need to continue? What things do I need to continue? What things do you think I need to just stop? And what things should we start? And just that whole idea of reflection, I think that helps you get through those middle years or those middle times where, ooh, that kid sounds horrible and I don't know what's going to get me to get them to play that B flat above the break or whatever. It's just, um, who knew I'd be talking or preaching reflective practitioner? But yeah, just thinking about where you've been and where you're going, and always having a way to record where you are so that you'll know how to get better. Like
So we
I would say, build a better mousetrap daily.
Right, right. And we've talked about reflective practice. It's something that I felt was probably something that benefited me in doing so. And Matt and I have talked about the difference between a secondary teacher versus a self-contained elementary teacher. Even like an elementary art teacher kind of falls in the secondary spectrum for this sense, in that they get to teach a lesson multiple times. Mm-hmm. In a week, in a month, in a year, versus the self-contained elementary teacher, in theory, teaches a lesson once per year. And so what would your advice be for both of those sides in terms of being effective in the reflective practice? What are strategies that we can use to effectively reflect often enough to adjust our teaching, to improve our teaching, but not also be bogged down with, feeling like we're constantly reflecting and possibly not even gaining anything from it?
I would suggest a couple of things. First, if you feel comfortable or not, record yourself. Record yourself teaching. And I know it's not the greatest thing, but maybe once a week, just record yourself doing a lesson and go back and watching that lesson and just thinking about, oh, I did this, I did that. If you see yourself on film, it's amazing the difference it makes versus how you think you remember something, how you think you talked to that student, how you think you delivered that one strategy. It's always a little bit different, and you see areas where you can tweak or improve. And as a band director or an art teacher or someone, even with the classroom teacher, I always allowed my teachers time off. I would buy subs. Ooh, that sounds bad. I would get substitute teachers and have them stay in the room, and they rotate around while some of the teachers go and they will do observations of teachers in the other teachers in the building, just so they can see each other. My teachers all had common planning. If you have common planning, that's great. But because of that common planning, they could figure out, okay, all fifth grade teachers are going to be teaching this lesson on this tool or this product or whatever. And so if I had a sub in, the sub goes into one fifth grade teacher's room. That teacher goes to the teacher number 2 room and watch her teach, and then vice versa. It's just one of those things where if you can get a peer or someone to come in and watch you and critique you, or just even talk about the idea of the things that you've done or how you created this specific strategy for the lesson, it makes a difference. As a band director, high school band directors, one of the great things that I did, I had colleagues that were willing to come in and listen to my band and say, oh, Greg, oh yeah, listen to this. You need to change the phrasing on this. You need to redo this. You need to redo that. And just having that outsider come in, because when we're in our own little silos or echo chambers and we're conducting music, we say, oh yeah, it sounds good, because you know what you think you want to hear, and you just automatically you're hearing the sounds that aren't really there. You bring someone else in and they're like, oh yeah, that part was wrong and that part was wrong. And I think if you can have a confidant who can come in and work with you, even when I was doing the tech class, actually tech class, my favorite teaching ever, because there was another guy doing the same teaching, basically the same course in a different lab. So we combined our classes and we team taught like the whole year, and it was my best teaching ever, because I would do a lesson or I'd do a strategy, and Mr. Park was there, and he'd come in, and afterwards we eat lunch and talk about, hey, you should do this and do that and do this, and we change it up, and it was like immediate just in time feedback, and I would be able to change it for the next class, or he would show me when the next class came in, and just having someone to be able to bounce those things off. I think that would be a great strategy as well, aside from recording yourself and listening to yourself or watching yourself at least once a week in the beginning, just so you can get an idea of what you're doing in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to throw it to you in a second, Matt, but I just want to reiterate, because you heard me blurt out yes when you said record yourself. That is the best thing I ever did as a teacher to one, I agree with you, do it as often as you can, like you said, once a week, but even just to do it once, it is eye-opening to see exactly what you look like and what in theory, your students are perceiving you as. But even as you expand that, if you are, let's say you're trying small group learning for the first time, or you've been trying it for a little while, film the class from a perspective where you can see all the students and collect data on the students. How often are they off task? How many are off task? What are, looking at all of those things. So, because hopefully when you're in that situation, you're really focused on the kids that are in front of you. This is a great way to then reflect back on, okay, do I need to put into practice better procedures and strategies to manage the students when they're working independently, collecting that data, and then you do it again in a couple of weeks and you say, okay, they're more on task, or, whatever that is. So you can see if your strategies for that thing. So not only just filming yourself as the teacher, but also filming yourself to be able to collect data on your students and reflect on what your students are doing in the lesson. So Matt, I specifically remember asking you on Show Something Have you ever recorded yourself and you said no?
I have since.
Does that answer change?
It has.
You okay?
And so I actually, Greg, I have a student teacher who's actually we've had on the podcast. He is a young man who is, has great teaching instincts, and so we also we haven't quite recorded in the sense that it was necessarily anything big. He's had some, samples that we set up something just so he could see himself quite early on. What were his habits? What were his nature? And we had a lot of conversations about, especially new teachers, or I would even say teachers that are adopting new curriculum. When we're so worried about what we're supposed to say, our nose is in the book. It just naturally is there to figure out how do we create scope and sequence? How do we, feather one concept to the next so that it, has impact on kids. And as we get, more comfortable, our nose gets a little bit further from the book and you can see the first row of kids in engagement. Or, I don't know about you guys, but my eye line always is that middle band of my class. I don't necessarily draw my eyes to the front row, and I don't necessarily draw my eyes to the end at first. It is, if I were to say who I call on most frequently, if you are in that middle range of my classroom, that's my default. And so sometimes I have to think when I structure who's sitting in what seats, where do I, naturally pull from? My responsibility is to obviously diversify and give every kid opportunity and, think, pair, share, all those type features. But if we're just doing call and response, I need to be very strategic about what my default is. And I found that out actually through recording, Ken. So thanks for pointing it out. Yes, I have grown through this podcast. I appreciate the progress report.
So, Matt, I have a question for you. So you say you have a student teacher in Pennsylvania. Do you all have to do that, or do the student teachers, do they have to go through the Ed TPA?
You would have to speak a little bit more detailed about it.
Oh, Ed TPA. It's a program, I think, by the dark side. I'm sorry, not the dark side. By Pearson.
I'm going to tell you. Yeah, I'm going to tell you no, but please tell us a little bit more.
This show is sponsored by Pearson.
Exactly. But it's. I know the state of Georgia adopted it, and the state of Tennessee had adopted it. I think Georgia may have dropped it since then. But in that process for student teacher or to get your license, you had to record a lesson and send it in. So that's why I was wondering if that's why you finally recorded yourself, because your student teacher had to, or if it was because Ken suggested.
Yeah, so we had his name's Anthony Wiggins, and we had him on weeks after he started with me, and he gave very classic new teacher, like brand new student teacher answers. We had him on towards the beginning of our student teaching process, and he gave, the beginnings of, hey, he knows what he's talking about a little bit more, quite a bit. I'm excited to have him on. So it was actually on our first episode. So when he felt most comfortable, now I will share, I love this program. I've been with Anthony for an entire year at this point. So normal student teaching was a semester. And if you were a dual major where you had special ed and regular ed, at least in elementary, it was a half and half type scenario. This, I've had him since this time last year, pretty much, which has been fantastic. So we had plenty of times to fit in recordings and make some adjustments. But I will tell you, there is no other overseer of, requirements besides Pennsylvania Department of Education, and they work closely. They give the guidelines to the university he goes through, which is Millersville, on how to do it. But I was not familiar with that, so thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. So with that being said, I believe that as we're talking about being able to step away from curriculum, what I'm hearing from your style is you give autonomy to your stakeholders to grow and develop, whether that was as an instructor in the music classroom, as it was an administrator, or I assume in this role of taking risks within ed tech, which for a lot of educators, it may be, your biggest challenge, trying to get other educators, other adults to feel comfortable to take risks on things that they don't completely understand. How do you feel like you navigate getting that same buy-in from educators to take risks? And I'm sure, like, at this realm, you're probably not working day in and day out with the same educators to get the same progress that you could probably lay a foundation in your previous roles and develop that trust that models this expectation. You're not going to be harmed if you try this.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Not being able to build authentic, really deep, authentic relationships, it does hinder that. But I always look for entry points. Depending on what school I'm in and if I know it or have an idea about how much technology training they've had in the past, I look for entry points. I think of so there's these two teachers. One teacher, she didn't want to put anything in Google Drive because all of the notes were supposed to go in Google Drive. You're supposed to take notes from the team meeting and put them in Google Drive, but she didn't want to type them up on her computer, blah, 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 blah. Ended up getting them a Rocket Book. Are you familiar with those? So she could write out her notes like she always has and take the iPad that I know that's checked out to her, push the little button and it sends it to the Google Drive so she doesn't have to worry about that. And it was just trying to find that entry point for that teacher. This teacher's, I would say she's since retired, but I think she's probably 65, 66. And then there's this other teacher who I was called in to help her with some Adobe stuff. My partner and I, we went to her classroom a couple of weeks ago to help her with Adobe. And we walk into the room and she's like, Alexa, please pause music or something. And then Bon Jovi stops playing. And then she comes over and she sits down. And I don't know if you know Dame Judi Dench. She's the old lady from Downton Abbey. Anyway, this lady, I had to go look it up because I was blown away. But we sit down and she shows us all this stuff in Adobe that she's trying to figure out. And what she's trying to figure out, she didn't need our help at all. She was like, okay, so when I use Photoshop, I do this. And when I use InDesign, I do this. But the kids have access to Photoshop Express. So I want my third graders to, or Photoshop Elements or something like I don't even remember. Adobe Express, that's it. And I want my third graders to be able to do this and this and this. And I was like, okay. So the thing that I looked up was her age because found out she's 70 years old and she's like blowing the top off of technology. And I was thinking, okay, so this is not a reluctant tech user. This is someone who she was in industry and came to teaching, she said, 4 years ago. Yeah, and she's just adopted and she's moving forward. And I was thinking, I need to take you on the road. I want to take you with me everywhere I go. So when someone's reluctant to use the tech, I can just say, look at Dr. Look at her. Look at her. Just because it's amazing just seeing her work. My friend and I were just standing in awe, just watching her go through all this stuff on Photoshop. And we're like, okay, that's good. But she's a third grade teacher. And we didn't need to find entry points for her. She was well beyond that. But with the reluctant ones, we find entry points. We figure out ways that if we can't find an entry point per se for them to jump into the tech, we'll get a lesson that they normally do or that they teach. And let me show you how we can enhance that with technology. Let me show you how we can change it around. We don't just take the lesson and make it into a digital lesson, like using the computer to make a digital worksheet out of this paper sheet that she has. We always try to enhance it. The whole idea of the SAMR model, moving up the scale, we always jump a level or two to show them what it could be. Not, oh, well, instead of having the kids write this, let's just type it out. Yeah, that's your entry point. No. We want to show them something beyond that. So
yeah, if I could answer that question as well, Matt, for me, something that I've been trying to encourage, especially coming off of the pandemic in my district, we're on year 2 of kids being completely back. This year it's like there's no restrictions, everything is normal, and you see a lot of technology usage, and it's a lot of independent kids on their device, regardless of what they're doing, but it's every student staring at a screen. And an entry point that I like to try to find is designing a lesson or designing an activity where the technology creates and increases opportunity for collaboration, and they're not even necessarily doing something on the device. So, for example, when I was working with a teacher, he did this debate carousel where there was 4 quadrants. The kids would write. They had to take a stance on a topic. They had to be on one side or the other. There was no gray area. They wrote it in the top corner. Then they passed their papers around, and then the next one they had to write why they agree with the response on the first one. Even if they disagreed with that opinion, they had to agree with it and answer why. And then the next one they had to write why they disagreed. And then the last one was they had to reaffirm their position, whether it changed or not. So during the pandemic, I helped them create it through Google Slides because they couldn't do the physical passing of paper. After the lesson, we reflected on was there value in it, and he found extreme value in the technology version because the whole purpose of this was a 10-minute warm-up to then fuel a more passionate discussion for the remainder of the class. Well, what we found was when we had that remainder of class discussion, students were referencing different points because the slide deck, the slide presentation had every single piece of paper. So it wasn't just one in front of them that they had. It was the entire class worth of paper. So they could say, hey, on slide 10, this person said, so they weren't staring at their screen for the lesson, but the technology was enhancing the collaboration. And so that's an entry point that I love to find for teachers because it shows them that the technology can be a tool to enhance the experience and even can take them off of the device. They don't have to be staring at the device the whole time.
Can I just follow up just a question? I feel like we're both of you could kind of contribute to it. How are you navigating technology integration not being the emphasis, as Ken, you're kind of alluding to? With those entry points, a lot of teachers that are maybe more reluctant, maybe tech phobic, whatever the case may be, less comfortable to push their boundaries. So long, ed tech has been the emphasis of the app, the device, the method you're using, as opposed to a tool and a strategy, which I think we all recognize that it provides another way to provide instruction, creativity, collaboration, those type features. How are you navigating, that risk versus reward of using technology, knowing that when you are dealing with a population that's struggling with technology usage, they overvalue, almost counting the minutes that they used technology as opposed to the outcome of what they're actually getting from students?
One of the things that I would always emphasize with my teachers, and I emphasize with any training that I do, it's not about the tech. It's never about the tech. And the whole idea, I guess Monica Burns wrote a book, Task Before Apps. And I say, yes. And there were times where if you're not teaching a technology class, you shouldn't be grading the kids on how well they use the technology. You're grading them on that end product, or you're grading them on the process that you want them to go through, not the technology. And I was always one to emphasize we're not grading technology. We're not grading technology. We're not grading technology. It's the process. So that was one of the things that I always try to push forward, that yes, this is just to enhance. And yes, I love technology. Technology is what I do. Technology is the job that I have. However, we need to make sure that it's even viable or useful to even use the tech. One of the things that I would do in my school, because I was principal and I could teach lessons when I wanted, I had a breakout edu kit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those. It's like, yes. So instead of breaking out an escape room. You break into a box, and I would take the kit to rooms, and I would tell the teachers, "Yeah, I'm going to do the lesson today," and they're like, "Okay," and I'll make up some story about, "Yes, we can't figure out how to do blah 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 blah. We got to find this," and I put clues up around the room, and the kids, they saw a QR code. I didn't have to say, "Oh, go get an iPad to scan that QR code," or and they saw a web address. I didn't have to say, "Well, pull out your Chromebook and type in the address. Let's see what happens." It was one of those things where the kids knew, "Oh, in order to do this, I'm going to have to do this," and it was just making sure that there were enough reasons for them to not necessarily use the tool just to use the tool, but have an idea of, "Oh, this tool can do this for me, so I'm going to use it." And actually, I started the year off, a couple of school years off, like that with my teachers, so they could see, yes, we have these tools, we have this technology, but it's not about the tech. It's about using the tech to get to our whatever our goal is. So, Ken, what do you have?
So I'll go with a similar theme and a much different technology, and it's the calculator. Just today, I was working with a team on just kind of firming up common assessments, firming up benchmarks for math, and it was early middle school, so the conversation came up about using calculators and this, that, and the other thing, and the state test was part of it, but it wasn't the sole purpose of the discussion. And we boiled it down to the fact that when we're teaching students complex skills, whether it's solving equations or it's complicated word problems where they have to figure out unit rate, then apply that unit rate. And they talk about how their students sometimes still struggle with, multi-digit multiplication, especially when decimals are involved, or dividing decimals, or multiplying fractions, those types of things. The way the conversation went, it was something that I did in the classroom, and the conversation kind of went in this direction, is if we're worried about students understanding those algorithms and being able to compute those by hand, we should spend time and we should teach them that. But when it comes to solving these complex problems and applying their knowledge and not being told you have to multiply, just here's the situation, figure out the answer, they should be using a calculator, because once they get into multiplying two numbers in the problem, because that's the next step, they've left that problem and they're now completely focused on multiplying those two numbers. So that technology, that calculator, is enhancing the experience for them to apply their knowledge, be problem solvers, and try to find a solution, whatever solution they have. And even showing their work, I would say to my students, if you use a calculator, showing your work is writing what you typed in the calculator. It's not then doing it by hand after you use the calculator. And so, kind of what you were saying about figuring out how the technology can help that. If a very similar situation, I did a breakout with a group, and they were trying to figure out a puzzle. And one of them was it was a person doing sit-ups, and there was numbers, and then it was plus, and it was a picture of a tile, and it was supposed to be reptile. And they were like, it's a person counting their exercises. And they didn't know what the word rep was. That I could clearly see they didn't have that in their schema. And they were on a computer looking at the picture. And I said, only if there was a machine or a tool that could give you answers to questions that you typed. And eventually one of the kids was like, Google it. And they Googled it, and they would read through, and they were reading through the responses until one of them saw rep, and then it clicked reptile. So again, it was about having that tool there to enhance the problem solving experience. And so I think when we can highlight that for teachers, and sometimes we need to, like you were doing with your breakouts, we need to show them an experience where the tool enhances the learning experience for students. And sometimes that can help just click for teachers that it's not about the app, it's about the process.
I think those, both of those are scenarios where I think is, the next generation of ed tech. I think that the wave of ed tech went from that app smashing, pre-COVID, and I think we were kind of fading out of it towards the development of LMSs. And, through COVID, I think, I don't know about you guys, I am revising so much of my curriculum post-COVID at this point. I felt like all the stuff that I built for my virtual learners or my staff that were doing virtual teaching was I need to tap into all of my ed tech resources and even ones that I wasn't familiar with, because I had to provide such different means for kids to participate so that they would participate. If it wasn't engaging, if it wasn't new, if it wasn't flashy, all of that, it didn't necessarily function well, because certain you would teach them a system and the next day or the next subject area it wouldn't work. And I know from my end right now, I'm actually almost dampening down my utilization of ed tech and choosing my Fab Five, or whatever the case may be, as what are my emphasis. And I almost I don't know if that's something you agree with, but the commitment to less can be more as well. But I think that kind of goes in line with what you're saying, is our emphasis is not the tech anymore. It's the outcome that we're going for.
Yeah, I do want to jump into our exit ticket soon, but I want to add to this one more time and ask you a question, Greg. What you were talking about in that, like the pre-pandemic, during, and now post. During the pandemic, everyone was forced to use technology, and it kind of brought everyone up to speed. And now, and I agree with it, I'm hearing a lot of teachers, administrators, even parents, even kids saying, like, can we get off the device? We're on the device too much. We're staring at the screen too much. And it's like, all right, let's make this our paper and pencil day. And I'm all for that. However, I feel like it's still very binary. We're all right, we're just not going to use technology today. We're going to do everything old school. And then it's like, all right, like now we're just going to watch Ed Puzzle today. Whereas, like, where's the middle ground of, again, where does the tool enhance the learning experience so that the tool is there, but I'm not staring at it the whole time? I don't know what you're seeing, Greg, or if you have an opinion on that, but how do we get it to be much less binary and more purpose driven?
I think you're right. First, let me say, yes, I'm seeing teachers say, oh, no more tech. We had so much tech, we don't need it anymore. And others saying, yeah, this was great. Let me continue to go and push and push and push. Yeah, kids. And I walk in and I see kids behind devices, and that's all they're doing because the teachers sent the lesson out. But I think it's one of those things where you got to continue to educate the teachers. I'm actually working with my team to build a curriculum guide, so to speak, to create digitally literate teachers in my district, for the teachers. And through it, we're trying to show that, yes, we have these tools. We should continue to use these tools, but we're not beating the tools beating the tools in the ground by using them over and over. We're figuring out specific ways to use the tools. We're using them strictly for enhancing our lesson or allowing the students to create. We're past the idea of consumption with the devices. I want my teachers to understand that these digital natives, and I still call them digital natives. Some people don't like that, but they're not digital learners, though. And these digitally literate teachers have to be trained so that they can show them how to be digital learners. Or we need to train the teachers. I need to train my teachers to be digitally literate so that they can transform these digital natives into digital learners. And that's not going to happen if they continue to throw tech in the air or tech in their faces without a purposeful use for the tech, be it engagement, be it enhancement. You don't want to do the substitution. We're way past substitution. That was 2020. Okay, that year's gone. We're so much further down the road, and I throw a bunch of models. Well, I don't throw a bunch of models at them. I let them understand a bunch of models, be it the TPAC or the TIMS or the SAMR. We look at technology integration so that we can enhance the learning, not just use the tools.
I love it. So on that note, I want to respect your time and our time and jump into our exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
I think the best thing a teacher can do to make that experience better is to think about the whole idea of RPM. The relationship, having an authentic relationship with the student, understanding that student's passion, understanding that student's motivation or mindset. Because I believe if the teacher understands the RPM, they'll lead to the academic success of that student.
I love that.
I love that. I've actually never heard that acronym before. I really like that.
I made it up a bunch of years ago.
Well, we like it. So I'm sure, being in the many positions you've been in, you've worked with great colleagues. But what is the best piece of advice that you've received? And it could have been from a colleague, maybe a supervisor, or even a student.
Best piece of advice. I know this sounds cheesy, and I know you have all heard it before, but I truly believe that they don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I think that goes along with the teachers that are in your building as well. There are many softball games and of teachers, students, or teachers' kids, or baseball games or basketball games where I went to go watch my teachers' kids play and do whatever to show them that I really care about your life as a person, and I want you to enjoy your life, and I'll support you and your kids. And there were times where I would challenge my teachers, hey, guess what? Today, no one gets to take home any homework. You can't do any homework, or you can't do any work over the weekend. And teacher's like, but I got to get no, you don't. I'm in charge. Don't do any work. Spend time with your family. And it was one of those things. And yes, and I would have challenges. I challenge you to eat a meal with your family at a table 3 nights this week. Oh, but I can't because I have to do. Yes, you can. I'm in charge. Don't take the homework home. If the teachers don't, or if you don't get your work all graded or whatever, and the parents get upset, send them to me. I'm okay with it. I'll talk to them. Anyway, so there you go.
So
I love that. I love the perspective that you threw out there of you as building leader. I really
before
appreciate
asking this next question, Ken, I can almost say, I imagine Greg's going to give a shielding answer. I'm going to take the blame for this one. So here goes anyway. So we all, I think, recognize that the school year goes in waves of times that, things are going smooth. That week after conferences being done is great. The week before conferences, a little bit different story, right? So there are those ups, but there's definitely those downs, including report cards, the stresses and the challenges, indoor recess, what have you. What is something that you think of or that you would kind of share with someone else to help power through those moments of challenge and struggle?
Well, a couple of things. Of course, the parents aren't sending you their worst kids. They're sending you the best they got. And they're sending you the best they got, and they want you to do the best you can with the best they got. And the teachers that you have in the building, if you're a teacher in the building, you need to understand that they are sending you the best, and they're having struggles that you may never even know. I think about a friend of mine who, this is a sad story, but I'll just tell you anyway. Her husband died while she was gone away on a trip. She was at a conference across the country, and her husband died. And she gets on the plane and she's flying back, and my wife and I were thinking, no one knows what she's going through. And she's going home to bury her husband that she left. He was happy and everything was going on, and she's going home, and now she's going to go bury her husband. And then I think about another friend, similar thing. We were at ISTE together in New Orleans, and her husband gets really sick. And she's trying to get on the plane, and she tweets out all this information. That's all I know about it. And she talks about how the folks were rude and they didn't talk to her. They didn't treat her well. And she was trying to get off the plane and get the connection and get home because her husband real sick, cancer, and he ended up passing away. And it was just one of those things that you never know what folks are going through. So be gracious, give them grace. From the teacher to the student to the parents, you got to give them grace. I've had parents, and yes, the whole shield idea. Parents come in upset all the time. I would, come into my office, yell at me. I'm the one, cuss me out. Well, yes. It's happened more times than I care to. Not since I've left the building, but yeah, parents would come into my office and just cuss and cuss and cuss, and that was okay because I'd rather them cuss at me, yell at me, throw things at me versus doing that to my teachers because I was there to protect the teachers. And it's just this whole thing that you never know what they're going through. And I learned early that lots of people go through lots of things. I remember, no, I won't tell her story, but there's this one principal. She's assistant principal at a high profile school, and she was going and speaking and doing all these dynamic things. And at the same time, she was going through a divorce, but no one ever knew it. And she was, I think, I don't know if she wrote it in a book or if she just told us about it, but her life around her was burning down. But at the school, you wouldn't have been able to tell. At the conference when she was speaking, you couldn't tell because it was just one of those things where she realized that it was more important for her to show this image, so to speak, to others to help them be positive and move on versus to go and complain and whine and all those things. So there you go. That was a lot.
No, it's perfect. It's something that we haven't heard before. So we've kind of talked about this all night, so I'm excited for you to add on to it or maybe boil it down a little bit. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What separates teachers who are the ones constantly seeking change, innovation, and adopting new teaching strategies?
I think so. I think one of the things that helps with that change and adopting new teaching strategies is the teacher being connected, be it on Twitter, ooh, bad words, or on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. There's a tribe out there that the teacher can connect with, and it may not even be online. It may even be with just a teacher down the hall. You can always learn from other people. It may be, ooh, I'll never teach a lesson like that, or it'll be something that you can immediately take into your classroom. But find a tribe that you can go to and that you can work with. And the thing is, one of the many things that I say, silos are for grain, not education. So let's not stay in our silos, even in our own classroom or our own school. Get out, break down those silos, or even just teaching in general. As Ken, you made reference to some of the books that I had or that I posted on Twitter. Just the fact that I read a lot of education books, yes, but I like to also read books about other things in other areas that aren't education, and that I realize, oh wait, this fits well with what I do here. And it's one of those things where you want to connect and break free and don't, I guess, get stuck in a rut.
The perfect answer. So I know I've enjoyed this conversation and learning with and from you. How can we continue the conversation and keep track of your adventures and the message that you continue to share helping education?
Well, you can find me on the Twitters at Greg Bagby. That's where I met most of the folks that I hang out with, be it the Todd Whitakers or the Eric Schinningers or the whomevers. I met most of them on Twitter at first, and then I end up going out and having an adult beverage with him. Yeah, find me on Twitter. And I also have a podcast of sorts, Books with Bagby, where I just sit down with authors of mostly educational books, and we talk about the process of writing a book and all the things, or their process. I have a few more episodes coming out, blah, blah, blah. And then I have another podcast that I'm working on. And I guess I'll go ahead and break it here. But it's the Education Soapbox. And it's basically I'm interviewing folks, and they're getting on their education soapbox and talking about their passions and their soapboxes that they have. And that podcast, I think I said I was going to drop it in December. I don't know. But right now I'm making recordings so that we can send it out at some point. So, and that'll be on what?
Podcast.
Is it iTunes? Yep. Is that where they have their
Apple Podcasts?
Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Spotify and
Google Play. Yep.
All those places.
And Anchor and
the works.
Yeah, it's on all those things. So there you go.
Awesome.
But Greg,
I appreciate that. So we'll link to all of that on our show notes page, which can be found at poweredup.com/show/97. Again, if you are listening to this, any show before about 93-ish was just, there was no slash between the show and the number, but I had to redo our website. So that was not a fun afternoon. And if you are looking for guest Greg, I would love to jump on your soapbox show. And if you want a show that would be probably double in length, you can have Mac on his soapbox.
Fair enough.
And so, but yeah, so I applaud you to do that. I think anyone out there just allowing educators and giving educators the space to talk, to share their passions, to dig into instructional strategies. It's what we do. It's why why Matt and I love doing this. Matt has said many times that this is the best professional development that he's ever had, just hosting this show and being a part of the conversations. And I would completely reiterate that, because we get to speak to people like you that just have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge and stories that we can share and learn from, and even maybe just be affirmed that what we're doing is good because somebody else is doing it. And it just makes us feel better to hear that. So I greatly appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Your teachers are clearly very lucky to have you, formerly as a building administrator, and now, hopefully impacting even more as a district administrator. So thank you for what you do for your teachers and for your students and for your community. It was great to meet you tonight, and it was great to get to know you. And Matt, why don't you take us on?
All right, as we power down this episode, without doubt, Greg, you left us feeling powered up. Thank you for the time, and everyone, will talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.